One of my friends at work, up until last week, had two dogs, two Dalmatians, Henry and William. And we occasionally talk about dogs because I've got two dogs as well. I say until last week because one of them, Henry, who's been ill for some time, finally had to be put down. I think he was suffering too much. And Bob, my friend at work, was understandably upset, but I think was also relieved that poor little Henry's suffering was over. But one of the things I was thinking about in relation to that, and I don't want to, this might sound disrespectful, and I hope that's not the case, but it's in relation to that phrase, which you only apply to dogs, I think. I've never heard it applied to anything else, which is when they get put down. And up until last week, when I started thinking about this in relation to Henry, my major association with animals being put down was a Monty Python sketch, which I think it's about budgies, and one of the cast of the Monty Python show says something to do with we just had our budgie put down. Was he very old? No, we just didn't like it. That's my major association, that this put down phrase is just a kind of, well, it's a euphemism, of course, but it's also a kind of almost a mechanistic or an instrumental term. It's not. It has no wider resonance than that. But since Henry died, and I've been thinking about that, I think there is another way of looking at it, really, or other ways of looking at it have kind of emerged for me. Partly, I think, because of the reading and thinking I've been doing about what down means and what up means, which I've spoken about before in some of these videos. And I suppose my main reference point here is James Hillman's book, The Dream and the Underworld, where he talks about downness very much in terms of how it figures within the psychic imagination. But this idea of death being at a moment when something is put down, I think is really significant in that. There's something about putting down which suggests that up to the point of putting down, you've been holding something, you've been embracing it or something, or holding it quite close to your core, maybe cradling it in your arms, something like that. And it's a burden, sure, but it's also something very close and touching and intimate, and possibly even might not even experience it as kind of part of yourself. And then at a certain point, you put it down. It's not like you're putting down a sack or a backpack that you've been wearing for a long time, or putting down, as I say, putting down a bird. It's not that kind of putting down. There's another kind of putting down, I think. And yes, it is a kind of giving in to gravity. It is a release. It is a following the natural path at which things move. Kind of entelechy of the down. It is absolutely part of that metaphor, I suppose. The putting down that I'm thinking of here, and here I'm reminded of another source, actually. I can kind of feel the ticking of another source going on when I'm thinking about this. And it's a poem by Rabindranath Tagore that I've mentioned before, called Ocean of Forms. It's in a collection of, I say this kind of song cycle, really, called Gitanjali. But Ocean of Forms is about, well, it's a beautiful poem, actually, very short, but it's about life and death and all those kind of things. And it plays with three key metaphors, one of which is to do with the a kind of musical metaphor, to do with the harp. And he talks about tuning this harp and the sound that this harp is making. There's also the metaphor which I've spoken about before, which is to do with ocean, hence the title Ocean of Forms, and going to the ocean, sinking in the ocean, being absorbed by and bound up with the waves of the ocean. There's a brief bit where he talks about the auditorium, almost as if this harp has gone into an auditorium and is kind of sounding and echoing in this acoustic space. But the last line, I think, is just fantastic. He's taking you through this little journey through this metaphorical landscape, And he's talking about the moment of his own death when he comes to die himself. And he says that at that point he will lay down his silent harp at the feet of the silent. I will lay down my silent harp at the feet of the silent. Which has always struck me as a fantastic line, actually. I never really understood what it meant in literal terms, because I don't think you can, but I think it does just evoke all kinds of things in a metaphorical sense. And I think what it's doing there is it's evoking a kind of put-downness that I think works perfectly well in relation to an animal that you've loved, like poor old Henry. You know, you're putting something down, but it's not because it's a burden, you're tired. You're putting something down in the way you put an instrument down at the end of its play. Put the harp down. The notes and the chords that you played are still kind of ringing in the air around you. And you're kind of listening to the end of that song. You know, you're kind of fully attentive to that. And the silence just kind of comes over you. And then you lay down your silent harp at the feet of the silent.